talks about privacy and technology. I don't feel remotely optimistic about accountability for the tech companies. I do not think they're going to get their shit together in terms of policing hate speech. Yeah, I just don't.
So Sheryl Sandberg is not going to save us?
I guess
she's even doing a good job saving herself.
No, that's a good point. I mean, some of the ways that technology got used in the last election that made me feel hopeful were things like postcards to voters, or the work that Swing Left was doing, having people do like the level of political engagement that they felt like matched their sense of comfort. Like, you know, more people canvassed than I know than like I had ever seen. Like even people who are activists, like I have people who were like, I would never be involved in electoral politics, like Malkia Cyril being like, okay, y'all, like, I've always thought this was ridiculous, but for real, we have to go do this now for 2018. And then people who've always been like, I'm just gonna go vote, being like, oh no, wait, we all have to actually go knock on the door. So I think a lot of that was facilitated by just how easy it was to figure out how to plug in. So like, there's a tiny silver lining in the like giant cesspool of terrible things that happen in social media.
I think in the interim too, and some reporters are starting to do this, or a number of reporters are starting to do this, like need to rise to the occasion and make sure that in the ways that they interact with their readers and viewers online, and the ways they report their stories out, they need to start using language that is a lot more specific and firm around things like white nationalism, because, you know, if your editor doesn't even allow you to say the word racist when someone says something that is absolutely 110% a racist utterance, a racist act, then we have no tools. We have no way to push back on anything. And we are actually doing a disservice to the people who come to us for information. And so one of the things that I found encouraging is that there are reporters just using technology, Twitter, Instagram, whatever, to kind of push each other to be better about this. Whether that's like when the AP sometimes just like has tweeted out something that the president has said that is not true, but not included the fact that it's not true in the tweet, you know, pushed and asked them to delete and redo. Or, you know, Soledad O'Brien does this all the time on Twitter. Yeah. Straight up be like, what you're describing is not racially tinged. Excuse me, it's racism. Call it what it is. You're a reporter. Be confident. Use the words that you have in your toolbox and be specific, because that's what you're supposed to do. And I think that a culture of holding each other to account is important. At the same time, though, I do think that, like, you know, YouTube and Twitter, like their corporate teams, can't just expect reporters to do the protection work that they should have been doing all along. So I'm not saying that reporters should be working two jobs at once, like reporting their stories out and doing what Twitter should have been doing all along, but in the interim, they can, like among industry standards and stuff, like people need to continue to try to rise to the occasion, and in the language that they use, serve their readers and viewers much better, and make sure that we have clear terms at which we begin conversations around radicalization, around white nationalism. Yeah.
We faced that quite a bit after Charlottesville, in this moment of, okay, what do we do? How do we explain these things for the first time? So a lot of our stories are based on the approach of, okay, how do we get them 5 years before college in that aha moment? So we were able to do an explainer that was simply, the headline is, what is the alt-right? And then what is, you know, now we go through terms, which is explaining like, what is capitalism? But being able to call a spade, and being able to introduce that word when you're hearing it all around you on the internet and it is buzzy, and be able to find a definition that is actually true, that you don't have to go through a college course for. I've seen so many newsrooms now too, and reporters call out a headline and say like, what is this headline, and rewrite it. So we've learned from that too, and doing it wrong. But I think that this moment is, like you were saying, it's happening in a different way.
So before we turn to audience questions, I want to ask each of you, what's one word you want to leave our audience with that gives them hope for 2020?
You're really springing this one on us.
It was in the email. I'm just saying, you know.
Hope called out for 2020?
A little bit. It was in there. It was written. Just saying.
Stunned silent.
Yeah.
The panel.
I don't have one word. I can give like a phrase.
Okay,
like
a
my
phrase.
personal
Let's open it up to a phrase.
2019,
Yeah, Jamila.
like, up vibe.
Okay.
Which is embrace chaos. I think about that when I think about some of the industry stuff we've been talking about. Our industry's in chaos. Okay, embrace that. Stop panicking and figure out the ways in which, like, I can use the talents that I have. I can use storytelling to have an impact on the way people think and move in this next election cycle. And, you know, these platforms may not be serving us and serving us responsibly, but they're there. How can we use them, and how can we bubble up to the surface of the conversations happening on them? So I think it applies both when you're thinking about, like, the industry that we or you all may be in that is in chaos, but you can think about it when you think about 2022. Like, okay, it's chaotic that 9 million people are running for president on the Democratic side. Embrace that. See it as an opportunity for people to have a lot of really interesting policy conversations. Let's stop caring about the, like, BS drama in everybody's lives, and let's, like, take this. We have like 1 million people who can, maybe we can suss out some really interesting options and opportunities, or get people to propose really interesting solutions to all the crazy things facing us right now, because we have so many people coming to the table. Like, how can we take that chaotic moment and not go, oh, like, such a horrible thing, the field is crowded now. Take advantage of the fact that the field is crowded now. And I think we can do that as reporters, but I'd encourage people who may feel like, oh my God, there's so many people, I'm not even gonna tune in right now. Like, no, tune in and start caring about 2020 now, because that'll serve you and go a long way when we're really in the thralls of it months from now. So embrace chaos.
I think to, like, mine is sort of a corollary, but I think, like, in embracing the chaos, you can sort of find a way to just, like, shed some of the fear and anxiety too, to feeling like we're just in it. We're just in it, and we're not going to stop being in it. It's like what you were saying about just, like, if this is the new normal, just, like, here we go. Yeah, just, you know, for me, it's been sort of liberatory. Like, I'm not worrying that much about, like, how this will be perceived in 5 years, or, you know, just, like, the urgency of, like, no, do the right thing. You know, I produce right now Preet Bharara's podcast, and he talks about do the right thing for the right reasons every day. And it's just like, all right, let's just try to do that. Let's all just try to do that. The other thing that I've been sitting with a lot, there's a poet, Marge Pearson, she has this great poem about sort of, like, finding power, and there's a line in it that I'm gonna get sort of wrong, but she says that power comes when you say we and you know who you mean. And I think, like, a lot of what I am gaining strength and hope from is gaining clarity about who my we's are, and, like, who I mean when I say we.
For me, my phrase is change is I'm actually not that I don't despair about 2020. I think that it's looking like the type of race you would want to have right now. I think anytime, for example, Democrats think that they are choosing someone who's electable, they don't get elected. And that's true for Adlai Stevenson, who no one in this room knows. I don't know, but I'm a nerd, so I do. Adlai Stevenson, who ran for the presidency twice and lost. He was supposed to be, he was the Hillary Clinton of his day, right? The person that was just gonna, like, win and be that, and he lost twice. And the last time the Democrats had an open race like this, the person least expected to win won the Democratic nomination and then won the presidency against a president who had 92% approval rating. So I don't think that we know what's gonna happen. We shouldn't pretend. We know it's gonna be a mess. And we know that we're going to continue to live in this age of chaos and this age of turns and reckoning. But I think there's a lot to be hopeful about in 2020, so I don't despair.
I love that.
This has quickly turned into phrases and not just a word.
No, that's okay. That's okay. The email left room.
Yeah, I wouldn't know, remember? But the phrase or wording that comes to mind is just sort of keep listening. The difficult conversations aren't going to stop. They haven't stopped. They're going to get harder. But I think that if we keep listening to each other, especially when things get difficult, and engaging in these conversations that are uncomfortable because we have a lot to learn, no one knows absolutely everything. And so keeping your ears just as open as possible, because the people around you have a lot to teach, whether or not you agree with it, there's a lot of listening to be done.
Yeah. Great. All right, so I've got a few questions from the audience. If y'all feel compelled to answer, please do. It doesn't have to be just one person. How do you approach stories that are identity-driven when you might fall outside that identity?
Can I answer that one? Because I edit the news and politics section, so I'm clearly a white woman, and it's a lot of identity-minded work, and a lot of the organizing that we're talking about is, of course, identity-minded. Was the question, how do you kind of navigate that?
Yeah.
I think that that's looking around the newsroom and seeing that there are voices in that room that are not like me. So we do a lot of bouncing off of each other because we have a diverse team, and being able, you can tell by a look if something is not going to fly, but we all hold each other accountable in our own space too. But knowing myself personally how to navigate it is also knowing when to take a back seat and realizing that it's not my story to be editing, and that there's probably someone on my team that could run with this, and it would be a more beneficial experience for the writer too to have that relationship.
That's a great answer.
Yep, +1, just deciding, this might not be my story to tell, and is there, if I get a tip, who do I know that could tell the story better than I can?
Yeah.
It might just not be mine.
Yeah. So another question is, how do you keep your voice unique in such a saturated world of voices? So a lot of things are voice-driven. When if you're writing op-eds, you're often told, you have a great voice, use your voice. But everyone has a voice, right? So how do you distinguish yours from the pack?
If you actually use your voice, it's going to be unique. Right?
Yeah.
The trick is to find out what your voice is and your perspective, and then to have the courage to use it, and then to have the courage to use it all the time. Mm-hmm. Right? And if you do those three things, then you will be, because everyone is unique. But the trick is to figure out what it is, and to not be deterred that the way you think about something, or the way that you say something, or the perspective that you have.
You could be that type of person, or you could be seen as knowledgeable. You're wrong. You have it. You have a story that hasn't been told, and someone hasn't shined a light on it yet. And so when you lean into that, I find all of my stories that have, by other people's standards, have done the best, so the most engagement. Mm-hmm. All of them are stories where, I could explain to you the nugget that traces back to a personal experience, or a personal understanding, or a familial sort of piece of heritage, or something that I was able to dig really, really deep in and do something pretty amazing through. And so, when you're a reporter, and I'm not ever writing op-eds, and I'm often sort of at the intersection of reporting and filmmaking. And so often my voice isn't traditionally just literally the words I put on a piece of paper. My voice is the decisions around the way I frame a shot. My decisions are about the type of people I put into a story. It's about the amount of space I give them to be themselves. That's my style, and that's my perspective. One of the things that you'll notice when you watch pieces that I do is I try to meet people where they're at. Mm-hmm. In part, that's the Vice style, but also I try to do it to sometimes a little bit of a deeper extent. So, for example, I covered a housing crisis story in Southern Illinois in an area called Cairo, and basically hundreds of people, all of them Black, they had been living in 2 different public housing units, and white people in the town had essentially embezzled the funds that were supposed to support those housing complexes, and now the HUD, run by Ben Carson, was just going to basically shut them down and kick all these people out, and they were going to have nowhere to go. So I go there to meet the families facing this absolute time crunch and crisis. And one of the things when people watch that story that they ask me is they're like, why did you interview the family? Why did you interview one of the daughters that I sit with, who's like about 9 years old, I think, at the time? There's a scene where I interview her about what she's going through and what she's seeing her mom go through. And we're at a playground and someone's blowing bubbles in the background and we're seated in the grass and we're both eating ices. And I think some people would think that's kind of distracting, like you literally have like red icy in your mouth while you're interviewing this girl. There's bubbles blowing in the background, like this doesn't look doesn't look like what you think of as a professional interview. But I see that decision as my style and my voice and my choice too. This is a 9-year-old girl. I'm asking her about a horrible, somewhat traumatic thing she's going through. I'm not going to put a big light in her face. I'm not going to sit her down in chairs, leather chairs, fancy leather chairs that she probably doesn't have at her own home, that are foreign to her, and I'm going to, make her extremely uncomfortable. No, I'm going to take her to the playground she would want to be at. And I'm going to meet her where she's at, because that's how she's going to tell the best version of her story. And the same thing with her mom. I was like, what do you do after work? Oh, I like to sit on my stoop and like watch my neighbors walk by. So I did an interview with her sitting on her stoop. And those are things where it's like, that's not my written word. You might watch my story and not pick up on those things. But I am, and the producers I work with are really intentional, because those decisions, they reflect who you are, how you see other people, how you put empathy into your work, and they end up giving you a unique style, and they end up differentiating you from other people who covered that same crisis. Their work looked very different. So if you are like, I'm not a great writer, I don't have a voice, I can never distinguish myself, that's not true. There's so many different ways in which you can show your voice and show what makes you different and show what makes you who you are, that aren't all the traditional ways you might think about showing your voice.
Mm-hmm. The traditional ways are all turned on their heads anyway about what's possible as a writer or reporter, or I think being able to tell your own story and realizing that you are the story too is something that, again, speaking from the perspective of someone that works with young people constantly, a lot of our writers have become first-time writers, and then now they are, writing and pitching all the time. And to watch people find their voices too, it's all throw it up at the wall, see what sticks, work with new people, make new contacts, do these things. But the people that I've noticed that have really been able to establish that confidence and build that success, it's all been just effort, effort, effort. And your creative voice, it's about the relationship, it's about those interviews. That's what makes them special. It's the people that you choose to meet, how you choose to speak to them, and then how you choose to put their story and contextualize it in a reported piece.
The next question is, do you ever feel that social media chatter, especially spilling tea, is distracting or destabilizing? How do you do your jobs as journalists and truth-seeking in this climate of immediate hot takes?
We're pushed to do hot takes for numbers quite a bit, and I don't think that we're unique in that as a media entity, but also some of those hot takes have come with extreme nuance and first-person perspective, and I am the best person to tell the stories, and this is my fiery hot opinion on it. I think I quit Twitter when all of the ICE stuff started going down, because I tweeted something that it was my first time going viral, and I was like, I'm not dealing with that anymore, and I've never logged back in. But I've realized that I've found the time to take myself away from the chatter, but that chatter is people telling their stories, people validating their stories. And so I don't think that it's as negative as people. I feel like I'm missing out on a lot of opportunities for stories coming out of the woodwork. I don't think it's all chatter. I think it's a lot of people taking up the space digitally that they want to and deserve to.
Mm-hmm. I just read nerdy sci-fi Twitter, so it's not, I don't know. I mean, I don't know, I find a great amount of joy in it. I don't really worry about the hot takes, but I also am such a behind-the-scenes person. My tweets are boring. I'm not a hot take writer.
Yeah, I think you have to balance. You have to try to figure out what works for you and what doesn't, because not engaging social media isn't the complete option, and then totally letting it define your life. Of course, you wouldn't have a life. So I think that that's really important. So for me, for Twitter, I know that I have the ability to stay on Twitter all day, all the time, constantly looking at stuff, constantly tweeting people, constantly, and then I wouldn't do anything else. So what I do is I have to go in, I read whatever is trending, I'll spend a little time, but I don't get absorbed in. And so I think it's like a lot of things. You just have to be disciplined and find out what your line is.
Yeah. I actually delete Twitter from my phone every Friday.
That's smart.
And then
what do you
reinstall it on Monday.
And then